This is the blueprint to financial freedom with real estate, and I'm going to walk you through step-by-step how to get there. The first step isn't even about real estate at all. It's about personal finance. But more specifically, it's about how much money or wealth you need to achieve financial freedom. I'm going to give you a shortcut to figure that out for yourself. But first, we need to talk about what financial freedom actually means. In case you're wondering who I am and why I'm qualified to talk about financial freedom, my name is Carson. You can also call me Coach Carson. I'm the author of two books called Retire Early with Real Estate and The Small and Mighty Real Estate Investor. And I've been investing in real estate for 21 years. My family and I have been able to use the cash flow and free time from real estate to travel the world and do more of what matters to us. And that's really what financial freedom is all about, is getting to the point where your investment income can pay all of your bills without you having to work a job. And when you can do that, you have a full bank account of the most valuable resource, your time. And you have the time to do whatever matters most to you and to your family. So if you want financial freedom where your investment income replaces your job income, you have to know how much wealth or how much money you actually need in the end to do that. And I want to give you a shortcut in real estate called the 6% rule. And this is similar to something you might have heard about if you're in the financial independence, retire early movement, or if you're into stocks and bonds. Some people use something called the 4% rule to estimate how much wealth they would need to build to retire off their wealth with stocks and bonds. You have a goal of $10,000 per month or $120,000 per year. That's what's called your FI number, your financial independence number. And this just means this is the number you want to get to. This is the amount of income you want to get to when you achieve financial freedom. So you could plug in whatever number you want. But if your number is $120,000, to apply the 6% rule, you would just divide that number by 6%. And you can follow along with me if you want to press pause and use your own calculator. But 120,000 divided by 6% equals $2 million. You can also do this math a little bit differently. If you just multiply 17 times 120,000, you'll get about the same amount. This just means that when you get to financial freedom, if you had $2 million of wealth and you would deploy that, you invested that into real estate, we think it might be reasonable that you could get about a 6% cash return on that wealth that you invest. Some people might say that's way too low. I could do a lot better than that. Some people might say, no, that's pretty aggressive. You should be lower than that. You can choose the number you want to use. This is something I feel comfortable with. But if you wanted to use 5%, for example, be a little bit more conservative, you would just divide 120,000 by 5%, and it equals $2.4 million. So you'd have to save up and build a little bit more wealth. Now, the point of all this, and why would you even do this, is the first step to figuring out how to achieve financial freedom with real estate, is that it shows you the gap between where you are right now. Let's say you have $100,000 of net worth saved up right now between cash and some equity in a piece of real estate that you have. Well, if you have 100,000 now, it just shows you have a gap. You need to get to $2 million in order to be able to achieve financial freedom. And the good news is that it's very achievable. You can do this. It might seem like a huge gap, and I know it is when you first start, but as I'm going to show you in the rest of this video, if you're diligent, you buy one property at a time, you apply some of these small and mighty principles, you can close the gap, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Now, you might be wondering, $2 million seems like a lot of money, first of all, and it also seems kind of abstract and not having anything to do with real estate. So I want to show you a couple of examples of how real estate could actually achieve having $2 million in wealth. If you're just starting, imagine 10 years from now, 15 years from now, that you have 10 single family houses, very simple rental properties. And let's say that each property is worth $200,000. If you have zero debt on these properties, and that's the assumption I'm going to make in this example. And so you have no debt on these. So when you have 10 houses worth $200,000, you have $2 million of wealth. The other question though is, how can you actually get the income on these properties to meet our goal of $10,000 a month or $120,000 per year? So let's assume each of these properties is worth $200, rents for $1,600 per month. So you collect that from your tenant, but you also have expenses. You have taxes, insurance, maintenance, capital expenses, vacancy. Maybe you manage it yourself, maybe you don't, but there's going to be some expenses there. And these are all of your expenses for managing a property except for your mortgage payment. Because remember, we paid the mortgage off on this property. So let's just say that's $600 per month. So if you have $1,600 in rent minus $600 in expenses, you have $1,000 per month in what's called your NOI, your net operating income. And since you have 10 houses, you can multiply that times 10. 1,000 times 10 is $10,000 per month, or $120,000 per year, which achieves your financial independence goal. Now, I know there's a lot of questions. How do you get those houses? How do you pay them off? We're going to cover that in a second, but I want to give you one more example for those of you who are like, I'm not going to pay all my properties off. What if I have some mortgages on the property? Can I still achieve financial freedom? Let's look at that example. So if you're going to achieve financial freedom with real estate using debt on your rental properties, which is totally viable, you're going to need to probably have more units than our prior example. So in this example, let's say we have 25 rental units. And just for an example, let's say we had 10 houses, 6 duplexes, and 1 triplex. Per unit, the average is $180,000 in value per unit. And if you have 25 units, 25 times 180,000 is $4.5 million in value. That's how much all of your properties are worth. But you also have some debt. You have some mortgages on each of these properties. And let's say that we had $2.5 million worth of debt on the properties. So we have equity, another term for wealth, of $2 million, which is similar to what our goal was here in the first place. But does our cash flow still work? So let's show you how that might work. If each unit, again, rents for $1,600 per month, and we have $600 in operating expenses, taxes, insurance, management, etc. We also have a mortgage payment this time. So let's say we have a $600 mortgage payment, and that's just your principal and interest. That does not include any kind of escrow. The escrow is taken into account here in the operating expenses. $1,200 between all those expenses, mortgage and operating expenses. What's left over is $1,600 minus $1,200, or $600 plus $600. That equals $400 per month. So each of our units in this example produces $400 per month in cash flow. But because we have 25 units, 400 times 25 is $10,000 per month, or $120,000 per year. So the point of all this, again, is to show you that there are multiple ways to get your financial freedom goal. You set a goal of like $2 million, for example. You can have 25 units. You can have 10 units. A lot's going to depend on your market. The goal I have for you here is to do the math. Make a personal finance goal of how much wealth you think you need to achieve, how many properties approximately do you think you need to have. Put that on a piece of paper, make that your goal, put it in your room, stare at that every single day. And then let's get on to the next steps, which is how do you actually achieve that with rental properties? Hey, real quick, if you'd like personal help from me to achieve financial freedom, just like we're talking about in this video, then go to coachcarson.com/mastery. This is my private community of intermediate and advanced rental investors where every week I do one-on-one coaching. We have small accountability groups. You get all of my live training and courses. You get all my systems and processes and checklists that I use in my rental business. If that does sound interesting and you choose to join, reach out to me, and really soon we'll be having a one-on-one conversation so I can talk to you about your own rental property journey. So you now know how to set your big picture financial goal using the 6% rule, so you know how much wealth you actually need to achieve financial freedom. And you also know that you don't need thousands of units to do that. You can do a small and mighty portfolio of maybe 10 properties or 25 properties. But if we leave it at that, it can still be really overwhelming because of that gap that we discussed. That gap between wherever you are right now and where you're trying to go can seem huge. So how do we close that gap? So I want to tell you a story about 2 friends of mine who have a very similar philosophy and also talk about the classic tortoise race. So one of my friends named Michael Zuber wrote a book, One Rental at a Time. He gave his story of how he bought one house at a time and built wealth and was able to leave his job in the corporate world. There's another book by a mentor of mine named Building Wealth, One House at a Time by John Schaub. The similar idea and what you can take away from both of their concepts is that going out and buying hundreds of units at a time can work. Some people do that, but really the best strategy is to buy one property at a time, take a deep breath, and then get it rented, learn a few things from that, and then go buy another one and do the same thing over and over and over again. So if you just set a goal, for example, of one property per year, if you said, I want to go out and buy one house, one property, and I just focus on that, and I do that consistently year after year after year, if you just do that simple goal, you can't help but build wealth. Now, there's going to be a lot of roadblocks. There's going to be a lot of ups and downs. But if you just focused on that goal, that is a process-driven goal, something that you can do to get from wherever you are. Let's say if you have $50,000 right now in net worth, you're trying to go to $2 million. That is the method, the process to grow from there. And this is really more of a tortoise strategy instead of the hare strategy. I wrote about in my book, The Small and Mighty Real Estate Investor, that the tortoise of real estate investing is really winning the race. That if you just go slowly and steadily, don't make any big mistakes, be consistent, buy one property per year, you will get to your goal. The tortoise is winning the race in 2025 and beyond. Now, I want to give you 2 practical strategies to help you implement that 1 property per year goal, to help you be that tortoise and win the race and still get there as quickly as possible. And it's a story about your savings rate that I learned from one of my mentors, a guy named Louis Stone, who I have another podcast interview with him if you want to check that out. But he was in his early years of his own business career, and he was working for someone who was a wealthy individual at a factory where he was working in North Carolina. This guy came up to Louis one time and he said, "Hey, Louis, you want to learn how to become rich?" And Louis, being a young person with not much money, said, yeah, I'd love to learn how to be rich. He's like, all right, here's what you got to do, Louis. You got to learn how to make $30,000 per year. And then you got to learn how to live off $30,000 per year. Got that, Louis? Yeah. Okay. Got it. Yeah. So once you do that, then you got to learn how to make $60,000 per year and still live off $30,000 per year. Got it, Louis? Got it. Then you got to learn how to make $120,000 per year and still live off $30,000 per year. Got it, Louis? Got it. Okay. He's like, Louis, if you can learn to do that, you can't help but become rich. He told me that same story when I was 23 years old, and it really resonated with me because of this concept of the savings rate. So if you want to close the gap between where you are right now and where you want to get to be, the tortoise race is not sexy. Part of it is you just have to save money. And part of that is keeping your expenses low. So being frugal. Now, you don't have to deprive yourself of every single thing. You can enjoy yourself as well along the way, but you have to have a gap between what you earn and what you spend. And this seems like basic stuff, but most of us, and myself included sometimes, when you start earning more money, it's natural to have your expenses kind of grow with that. And you start getting bigger and bigger and bigger so that the gap between what you earn and you spend doesn't get bigger. So you have people making $1 million a year who are spending almost all of that. And so if you want to get wealthy, you want to close that gap, number one, you just got to have capital. You got to have money that you can reinvest into rental properties. Now, increasing your savings rate or the gap between what you earn and what you spend will definitely get you towards financial freedom and building wealth, just like Louis' mentor said. But if you want to get there faster and more consistently, then a second tactic is using leverage or using other people's money to buy your properties and to do it safely. And in real estate investing, one of the cool things about real estate is that you can safely use leverage. Instead of you having to save up $50,000 per year to buy a $300,000 property, which could take you years to do it, you can borrow most of the money and use your $50,000 as a down payment. And this allows you to stay on that pace of buying 1 rental property per year. And I'm going to get into strategies here in a second about how you can pick which strategy is best for you right now. But in terms of leverage, you can use strategies like house hacking, where you move into a property and get between 0 and 10% down loans. You can use 20% down rental property loans from a variety of sources. You can use the BRRRR strategy, where you buy a fixer-upper property and then you add value to it, increase the value, and refinance it to pull all or most of your money out. You can also use partnerships and other creative financing strategies using seller financing, which I've done a lot. And in all these cases, the common theme is you're using leverage to accelerate your progress without you having to have all of the money up front. And I want to show you real quickly a calculation on why this is so important. This is a financial calculator. I use a free version at fncalculator.com you can check out. But what a financial calculator does is shows you the math over time. And let's assume that you started with $50,000 in savings right now, and then you were able to save $50,000 per year, which would be very impressive if you could do that. But let's say you could really kind of tighten it up and you're able to save that much money, and your goal is to make $2 million in wealth in the future. I want to figure out how long would it take me at various returns on investment. So a very conservative return, if you just pay cash for properties, you might be able to get a 6% or a 7% return on your money. And so how long would it take you, given all of those other factors? It would take you about 20 years to achieve a $2 million net worth, saving that much money and getting a 6% return. But the cool thing about the calculator is you can play around with this and say, what if we start using some leverage? What if we're able to, instead of a 6% return, we're able to double that and get maybe a 12% return? How long would it take to get to $2 million using the same savings amount given a 12% return? Well, it'd take us just under 15 years. Well, you could just keep on going with this, and you have to figure out what's a reasonable return on investment. Every property is going to be a little bit different, but I see real estate investing in my own world and also people I work with who consistently get 12 to 15% returns using safe 30-year financing and doing some of the strategies I just mentioned. And so if you use a 15% return, for example, you might be able to get there in 12 or 13 years. So my main point here is not to say you have to get exactly this return or that return, but if you can safely use leverage and you can get to your goal in 10 to 15 years, that's incredible. Some people save up money and try to retire at 65 years old and don't have enough money to retire and to do what they want to do. And we're talking about 12 to 15 years using very conservative assumptions, and you can get to financial freedom. But the key is saving money and having a high savings rate and using leverage. So far, my blueprint has been focused on the big picture of financial freedom, like figuring out how much wealth you need, how many properties you need, then how to close the gap, buying one property at a time, saving money consistently, and using leverage to close the gap. But now I want to get into the nitty-gritty of real estate investing, specifically how to figure out what strategy you should use to buy your next rental property. This can be really overwhelming. There's so many good strategies out there. So I'm going to give you some tips on how to figure that out for yourself. But before we do that, we're going to be getting into a lot of in-depth tactics and strategies in the rest of this video. And you're going to probably want to take some notes. So I want to offer something free that will help you with that. It's my real estate investor toolkit. It includes a lot of practical tools like a spreadsheet to help you run the numbers, a cheat sheet that helps you find different ways to find good deals, a cheat sheet to help you figure out different ways to finance your deals, and a lot of other practical downloads and tools you can get for free. So if you want to get that, I'll have a link above me here and also in the podcast or the YouTube description below. Check that out and you can download it and follow along in the rest of the video. If you and I were sitting down next to each other and I were coaching you on how to figure out the best strategy for your real estate investing, I would start by talking about the 3 phases of a real estate investor. This is a concept I learned from Pete Fortunato, a longtime investor from Tampa, Florida. And he always talks about that you go through the starter phase first. And I think about that as just getting your first deal or two. The point of the starter phase isn't to hit a bunch of home runs and have these amazing deals. It's basically to learn and to build your network. And you don't want to make any big mistakes. So the strategies that you might want to focus on as a starter are things like house hacking. If you haven't heard of house hacking, I do videos on this pretty often. There's also books on Bigger Pockets you can read about house hacking. The idea is to use your residence, though, to get into the real estate investing game. For example, you can move into a duplex and live on one side of the duplex. You can live in a house that you rent out multiple bedrooms of your house to kind of generate some income there. You can also do some variations of house hacking, like just living in a house that eventually could become a rental property. And so you live in there for a couple of years, you get it situated, you get it fixed up nicely, and then you move out. But instead of selling the property, you keep the property. I call that a live-in, then rent. You can also flip your house. You can live in a house and then flip it. The point is you can use your residence to get started, and it's a little bit lower risk because you have to live somewhere and you have much lower down payment strategies to get into house hacking. If you already are happy with where you're living and you don't want to do a house hack, you can also just go with lower risk rental property strategies. So typically what I mean by that is buy more turnkey style rentals. That doesn't mean you have to buy it from technically a turnkey company, but buy properties that aren't huge fixer-uppers, something that maybe needs a little bit of cosmetic work or is a new construction property. You're not going to have the best deal in the world likely because you get the best deals from properties that are in distress that need a lot of work. But as a new investor, when you're a starter, the strategy of just going with lower risk rentals for your first deal or two while you learn, while you build your network makes a ton of sense. But eventually you're going to grow into the builder phase. And this is the longer grind that I talked about, where you're really trying to accelerate your return on investment and go from a small amount of money to a large amount of money. And you can transition into fixer-upper rentals. This is the classic BRRRR strategy where you buy a property, you remodel it, you get it rented out, and then you refinance it. And if you buy it low enough at a low enough price, you might be able to refinance it and pull out all or most of the money that you invested in the first place. And when you do that, you can really accelerate and use leverage to do another deal and then another deal without having to run out of money. So strategies like the BRRRR strategy or just more active strategies like the short-term rentals and mid-term rentals can make a ton of sense as a builder, but you can also go back to the original strategies, house hacking, low-risk rentals, turnkey. Ultimately, you have to find something that you're comfortable with and also know that just because you do it on these first 2 rentals and this certain strategy, you can transition and pivot to other strategies later on. So that's the starter in the builder phase. Hopefully that helps you get a little bit clear about where to start. As a harvester, if you find yourself already having been investing for a while, you're closer to that net worth goal that we talked about earlier, then you can still use all of these other strategies that we talked about, but you might want to do them with lower risk. So make larger down payments or even just pay cash for properties. I've started doing that more in my harvester phase. You can also get into private lending where you become the bank for other investors, either through short-term loans, like kind of like hard money loans, or by just partnering with people over the long run. So I've done some deals where I put up the money for a young investor, a new investor who was in the builder phase, but didn't have enough money to do more deals. And they were able to do a deal without any of their money. And I was able to do a deal without any of my time or effort. As a harvester, the point is to cross the finish line of financial freedom. So it's not necessarily to keep growing and have the highest return on investment. It's to reduce your risk, is to reduce your hassle that you have more, so you have more time to do what matters. And it's also to increase your cash flow, because ultimately this is about harvesting your equity and actually living off of it, or having the freedom and the options and the flexibility that you set out to get in the first place. So all of these strategies are good places to start if you're already in the harvesting phase. The last step of the blueprint, figuring out your unique strategy instead of just copying someone else, will definitely take you a long way. But the next step of the blueprint is all about figuring out, what does it actually mean to have a good deal in real estate? Because the fundamental of what we're doing here is buying one property per year, or whatever number works for you. But we have to buy the right properties, the right deals, the right numbers in order to build wealth and get to our goal of financial freedom. And so I like to use a concept called a buy box. And a buy box is just a process of eliminating 99% of the properties in your market and creating a box or description of what it means for you to have a good deal. It's your unique calling card, your competitive advantage of saying, this is the location, this is the region, this is the neighborhood, this is the type of property I'm buying, this is the price range that I'm buying in. And you can use this to help yourself become focused. You can also use it to help your real estate agent, to help wholesalers, to help other investors who are going to bring you deals. So I want to give you a couple concepts on how you can build your own buy box. So my first step of creating a buy box is to pick a region or a market that has good potential. And I like to use the metaphor of a solar system. So you see this picture here with the sun and the planets. And for those of you who actually understand astronomy, you know this isn't to scale. The sun's a lot bigger, but it helps me with my purposes here. So the best regional markets to invest in have what's called an economic sun. So I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. So think of Atlanta with all the different corporations and the jobs you have there and just all the dynamism of the economy there in Atlanta. That's the center of the sun. It's putting off economic heat. But the best investments that you make, especially as a small and mighty investor, are not always right in the center of the sun, in the center of the city. Sometimes you got to go to these little pockets, either right close to the sun or even in the suburbs of the city. And I grew up in a town called Noonan, Georgia, outside of Atlanta. It just happens to be one that I understand well. And Noonan has its own little character, its own gravity in its little suburb planet. And it's got its downtown. It has a lot of history. It's got restaurants and bars and some cool stuff. It has housing right near that that's walkable, which is actually one of my philosophies. My approach to real estate investing is finding walkable places. And there's a real estate consultant named John Burns who coined a term called surban, meaning you're in a suburban location, but it feels kind of urban. So people can go get kind of the affordability of the suburbs with more housing, but still feel like they have the character of a downtown and walkability and interesting things to go to. So I like to look for places like that. They're in the gravity of the economic sun, so benefit from the jobs and all of that, but have their own character, have a little bit different price point, have that suburban quality. And so that's my recommendation, is to find, number one, an economic sun, which is actually easy to find. If you look in the United States and other countries as well, the big cities where the population is growing, where there's good jobs, you can find that in just kind of top 10 lists. But then you go within those markets and you look for the 50 to 100,000 person little pockets outside of the city or in the close suburbs of the city. Pick a place like that, and that's the first step of creating your buy box. Once you've narrowed down your buy box to an economic sun in a satellite city, I recommend continuing to zoom in on your satellite city to find little micro locations to invest in. And this could be a zip code, could be a school district, or even a neighborhood or two that you choose to focus on. And there's a lot of different criteria investors use to narrow down their neighborhoods, but I like to use a concept called the path of progress. And I want to explain this by looking at, this is a map of my home market of Clemson, South Carolina. And just to give you a little bit of background, Clemson is a college town. It's a small college town. The whole city basically revolves around the university. People move there either as students to go to school, or you work there, or you do have some kind of business related to the university. The center of the town is the downtown district here, is kind of circling, and this in yellow, and then the university campus. So that if you put a pin in the middle of the map, that's where you want to be close to. And then if you go out from there, though, investors sometimes use this informal rating system called Class A, Class B, Class C. It's an informal rating system that you can measure roughly by the price of the properties in the area. So in my location, there's this Class A location that's right near the water. It's right near downtown. It's right near campus. It's one of the most expensive parts of town. This is where you're going to find $1.2, $1.5 million properties. And just a simple little property might be $500,000 or $600,000. So that's the prices in my area in 2025. But then you can go a little bit farther from that, you can find some Class B locations. You go even farther from that, you'll find some Class C locations where the prices get a little bit lower. There's fewer people owning properties, more renters. The point of all that, though, is the path of progress is looking where the kind of the center of town is, where everybody wants to be. And as it gets more expensive, it kind of spills over into another area. This has been one of my long-term real estate strategies that's worked really well, is try to figure out where is that spilling over of progress happening? Where's the next place that's going to be affordable, but still has some of the criteria of the Class A location? So for example, my business partner and I for years kept on buying in this location, this Class B location, which we thought was very similar to the downtown area, not quite as nice, but it was about a mile from downtown, a mile from campus. You could still walk. It was on the bus line, had some other criteria, had kind of the old part of the town is in this area. So we liked that location because it had qualities of the best location, but it was a little bit less expensive. It was in the path of progress. We made a prediction, a bet that was going to a little bit better. So we started buying properties there. You can do the same thing in any town. You're going to have the best locations, and then there's going to be some kind of movement of progress. If this town is growing, if the population is growing, which is why we started off buying in a region where the demographics are good, then there are going to be spillover effects into different neighborhoods, and you can make a lot of money by choosing properties and locations in your buy box. They're going to benefit from that as a buy and hold investor. So one way to think about this path of progress is to buy pretty properties in the path of progress, or to buy ugly properties in the path of progress. So PP plus PP, or UP plus PP. It's just a little acronym that I'm trying to help people remember this by. Make that part of your buy box so that you can find properties that will benefit from the growth of your location. So far in the blueprint, you've gotten clear on your big picture financial goals, your real estate strategy, and now your buy box. I like to call all of these together the foundational section of the blueprint because everything else is built on top of them. But now we can move into the mastery section. The skills in this section are where I spend most of my time coaching people in my private community, Rental Property Mastery. And it's made up of 3 key skills. Number 1, acquiring properties. Number 2, financing properties. And number 3, managing properties. This video could be hours long just teaching these 3, but I do want to give you a few key tactics from each of these parts of the blueprint. Let's talk about the first of those skills, buying properties. Now, there's a whole lot of information out there about how you can find good deals, but I want to break it down into a 101 level and a 201 level. So for most of you who are just buying 1 property per year, you're a small and mighty investor, you're doing this part-time, you might be able to just get away with this 101 level. And I want to give you 2 ideas of kind of tried and true ways to find good deals. The first is by getting listed leads. These are properties that are on the MLS. And by the way, almost 90% of all people who sell properties sell them through a real estate agent listing their property. So this is a huge universe of properties. And I know a lot of investors would complain or say, hey, there's too much competition on the MLS. It's true. There's a lot of people going after those deals, but there's also a large volume compared to the off-market deals, which I'll talk about in a second in the 201 level of deal finding. But you want to start with listed leads. Number 1, because it's free. You can just get listings coming to you automatically, either through like a free site like Zillow or Redfin, or even better from the MLS through a real estate agent that you work with. And so the number 1 recommendation I have is to set up an automated search. And this is why the buy box was so important. You use your buy box as the criteria for your search. You want to narrow that down, and every single day you want to get new listings, you want to get expired listings, you want to get anything that prices have changed, basically anything inside your buy box, you want to know about it, and you want to filter through those and decide, is this close to me making an offer or not? And you want to make as many offers as you can. But you do that through an automated search, just coming in all the time. And I found the real key to getting deals on MLS, and I bought lots of them over the years, is you either need to be the first person to a deal or the last person. So what I mean by that is if you see a good deal on the MLS and it shows up in your inbox, if it's really, really good, it's a good price, it'll be gone in minutes or hours. So you need to go jump on it right now, make an offer. So be ready, have your money ready, have your time schedule ready to be able to break away and make an offer. If you can't do that, or if you miss out on the first deal, you can also follow up, because there's some deals that over time, the seller gets more motivated, they're willing to drop their price. So let's say you make an offer, they reject you the first time. You have a spreadsheet where you follow up with everybody, and you're going to be the last person. You're going to be the one who continues following up. You keep asking the listing agent, or have your agent ask the listing agent, hey, has anything changed? Do you think your seller would want to consider another offer? And it's a small percentage of people who'll say yes to that, but every once in a while you'll get one where they're like, all right, I'm ready to sell. You're still here. Let's drop the price and let's go. So those are some kind of quick tips on how you can buy listed properties. But the other thing you want to do, and this is where a majority of my deals have come from over the years, is cultivating and building a referral network. So other people bringing you leads for deals you want to buy. And again, your buy box is really critical because you have a little elevator pitch where you can tell people, this is the zip code I'm looking at, this is the price range. But you want to have real estate agents. So you might have one real estate agent who is your person sending you listed leads, but you also want to build relationships with lots of real estate agents, commercial agents, different people. Tell them what you're looking for. They can sometimes get pocket listings where they haven't even listed it yet because it's a big fixer-upper and they don't want to put it on the market or whatever reason. If you're the first one, it's nice to know those agents. So keep on reaching out to people. You can also start talking to people, wholesalers, and wholesalers vary and depend on the state you're in, but wholesalers are other investors who are putting properties under contract and then buying them and then flipping them to other investors. They're getting a small markup instead of fixing it up themselves. So if you're ready to fix up properties, if you want the properties at a distressed price, but they're typically more distressed properties, then wholesalers are a great way to source leads and just get on their list. A lot of them have email lists where they send their leads, but even better, talk to them directly, build a relationship with them. Take them out to coffee if they'll let you, and just build a relationship and let them know what you're looking for so you can be first on their little small list of people who they contact. And then the final recommendation with referrals is talk to other investors. This isn't your competition. There are other people who are buying near you, but it doesn't meet their criteria, or they're busy, or they got more going on. I've bought lots of deals by collaborating with other investors. So don't forget about that. I even tell people at a meeting, this is what I'm looking for. I also have a signature in my email. So as I'm sending emails back and forth to other investors, telling people exactly what I'm looking for, you just need to let everybody in your world know what it is you're looking for. And then it tends to get back to you and people say, hey, that's the property. Let me send that to Chad. I know what he's looking for in Clemson or Central or Seneca or wherever I'm buying properties. Now, if you want to go beyond the 101 level of deal finding and have a higher volume of deals that you buy or just buy better deals, you can go to the 201 level, which for me just means going off market and going directly to sellers, not looking at listed properties, but talking to people who don't even have the property listed at all. And this is a big topic. I do a lot of videos on this, but one of my main recommendations is a tool that I've been using for years and recommending called Deal Machine. It's basically an app that you can use to build a list of motivated sellers. And these might be people who you're driving around, driving for dollars or walking for dollars, that you find a vacant property or fixer-upper property, and you just add this to your list, and they make it really easy to reach out to them, get phone numbers. But the concept, whether you use Deal Machine or not, is you want to build a list. And there's a lot of different lists you can build. I recommend starting with your buy box again and looking for properties inside your buy box, and then maybe adding a level of motivation. So for example, maybe looking at out-of-town owners of properties or properties that were recently expired or properties that are in pre-foreclosure. Lots of different ways you can build this list, but you're going to build a list of maybe 500 to 1,000 to start off. And then you're going to reach out to those owners either through the phone or through direct mail to let them know you'd like to buy their property. Now, this is a numbers game. Not every single person you reach out to, of course, is going to respond to you. But if you follow up, and again, you're diligent with that and you negotiate and you're just persistent, you will find deals that are sometimes a lot better than the deals you can find on the MLS. Some of my best deals and some of the best terms that I've bought properties with, including seller financing and lots of creative financing, have come from reaching out to the seller. Now, this is 201 because it involves a little bit more work. It involves a little bit more skill of negotiating and doing contracts on your own. But if you're ready for that, then this can be a great way to expand your business and buy more properties. Now, as you probably know, being able to use the first skill of buying properties doesn't do you a lot of good if you don't have the money or the financing to buy properties. So I want to unpack some tips on how you can finance your rental properties if you find good deals. And I think about this a lot like a toolbox. So imagine you're a carpenter and you're learning how to build a house. Now, if you're an apprentice carpenter and you're just getting started, you wouldn't necessarily learn how to use all the tools in the toolbox. You probably start with one, learn how to use a hammer, learn how to use a saw or screwdriver, and then you grow into the rest of the tools. And I find real estate investing to be very similar to that. You want to find one or two tools that you can really study and really get good at as a new investor, and then you add another tool and another tool. But the more tools you get, the more effective and the more successful you'll be as a real estate investor. So let me explain the tools as I see them, kind of the core tools that I see real estate investors using that I've used as well. And I break them down into short-term tools and long-term tools. So short-term are tools of financing that are typically better for 6 to 24 months. So like under a year to up to a couple years of owning a property. So those are things like having a home equity line of credit. So if you have a home equity line of credit on your residence that you live in, many of you have your properties appreciated and your debt's paid down. So you might have a couple $100,000 or more on a home equity line of credit. That could be a great source for short-term money. Now, I don't like leaving home equity line of credit money on a long-term rental property, like using it as your down payment and just leaving it in there. Because number one, you have payments on that home equity line of credit. The terms aren't typically as good. And it's also a risk if you get into a recession, or many times banks will call those loans due if you read the fine print. So you just want to be careful with your home equity line of credit. Use it as an in and out money short term. It can be a great tool for that. The same with your cash savings. If you have some cash savings and you can combine that with a home equity line of credit or some other source of money, use that for your short-term deals. And these are typically for like fixer-upper deals where you find a really good property. If you make a cash offer and use a home equity line of credit or cash in order to buy it quickly without having to go through the hoops and the appraisals and all that stuff that you have to use with a conventional mortgage, that's what the HELOC, the cash savings, and also hard money and private money are really good for. Hard money and private money are similar types of loans. They're typically higher interest rates. They're typically shorter terms. Hard money is more of a professional private money lender, someone in the business of making that loan. Private money might be an individual that you meet, like an investor club meeting, who just makes you a loan directly. But in both cases, typically a little bit higher interest rates and shorter terms, but all of those can be great for buying properties over the short term, getting them done, and then later refinancing them with more long-term financing. So there's a whole nother set of tools that you're using. If you start off with a short-term tool and you pay it off using, for example, a conventional loan or a DSCR loan, those are both investor tools. Like conventional has a lot of different tools underneath it, but it's basically the loans that are backed by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which are two big mortgage organizations who buy a lot of the mortgages out there. And as an investor, you can still get those on single family house, duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes. So if you want to get a 30-year loan with the best terms, conventional is typically your best bet. There's just more hoops to jump through and more qualification you have to do. And eventually you get cut off maybe 5 to 10 loans with conventional loans. So a DSCR stands for debt service coverage ratio, is another good option where you can get a 30-year fixed loan. And these weren't available when I first started. So I think it's been a great innovation in the mortgage market. And they just look at the income of the property. So they're much more flexible, but also still give you the safety of having a 30-year loan. So I like both of those in combination with these other short-term tools for your fixer-upper rentals, like the BRRRR strategy, where you're buying and then refinancing. Now, many of you might just start with a pretty property, so it's like more of a turnkey property, and you could just start with conventional or start with DSCR, or if you're moving into the property like in a house hack, you can just use an owner-occupant loan, which often has a lower down payment, as we talked about earlier. So all of those really just depend on your strategy. So you need to think about what's your strategy, what's your stage of investing, and the tool that you're going to focus on will sort of become clear based on that strategy. And I also mentioned that something I've used a lot of is something called seller financing and also creative financing using partners and other tools. This is something that's a little bit more advanced, a little bit more difficult to negotiate. But if you can do that, it can open up a whole lot of different options and a whole lot more deals that you can do. And sometimes negotiate really good financing terms, lower interest rates that can help you make a deal pencil and be a good deal when it otherwise wouldn't with another type of financing. So again, my recommendation to you is pick one short-term tool, pick one long-term tool, get good at that, start there, really study it. And then as you get good at that, expand your toolbox to become a better real estate investor who can do more deals. Remember, there's 3 skills to this mastery section of the blueprint. You got to buy properties, you got to finance them, and you got to manage the properties. Now, a lot of people would say you make your money when you buy. Have you ever heard that as an investor? I believe that for a long time, and I do think there's some truth to it. But what I really believe is that the third skill, you make your money when you hold. You can make some money by buying a property below its value. You can make some money with some good financing, but the skill of managing a property and holding it and the patience of holding it is really where the big wealth of real estate investing comes in. So one part of this is just mentality and one part some tactics. And I want to talk about the mentality of being patient just to hold on to your good rental properties. It's a lot like if you plant a seed. I love this metaphor of being a gardener. If you want to have a fruit tree, you can't expect to have an apple tree producing fruit tomorrow. Like you have to, if you plant a seed, you got to be patient, you got to water it, you got to nurture it, and you're not going to get a lot of fruit early on. And in the rental property vocabulary, this means like 5 years, 6 years, 10 years down the road is where they really get mature and start paying you the dividends that you've been expecting from the beginning. So you got to have a little bit of patience. You got to get through that one of those real estate cycles. You got to hold on. And just to give you an example, I bought a property, my very first house hack. When I first bought it, I thought it was a really good deal, and it was. I had about $30,000 to $35,000 in equity up front, so I bought it at a discount, and maybe like $400 a month in cash flow when I first started renting it out and moved out of it. As good as that was up front, by holding that property over time, a decade and a half later, I have about $350,000 in equity in the property and over $1,000 per month in cash flow. So it is getting better and better and better. So the point is buying and holding by just having the momentum of the market in a good location kind of at your back, the tailwind of that can really make you a lot of money. But you can't get there unless you learn how to do the nitty gritty details of managing properties. So in that spirit, I want to give you a few tips that'll get you started with property management. And this is something you want to continue to learn. But there's three things that I really focus on to try to manage my properties and be able to be patient over the long run. That's having a good team, it's having good systems, and having good software. So let me say a few things about team. It depends on if you're going to be self-managing or getting a third-party manager, but having a manager for me is the number one team member, because by having a manager, they can have other contractors and other people that they use. I can kind of go through them. So they're like my central team member. But I also self-manage some properties, and you might self-manage yours too as a small and mighty investor. That's totally fine. But eventually you might also want to have some people that you can hire, like a VA or an assistant or somebody to kind of help you do some administrative work. That could be a long-range plan, even if you're doing some of the work yourself up front. But no matter how you manage it, you also want to have people who can repair your properties. So if you're doing a long-term rental, having a handyman who can just do a variety of things and who's willing to be on call and just go to a property to solve a problem quickly is invaluable, really important to have. And then other subcontractors, particularly HVAC, like heating and air, plumbing, electrical, things like that, painters. You're going to have a list of different contractors who'll be your go-to people when a property turns over, when you have a maintenance issue. So building those relationships with your team, really important. Like I lived in Spain for a year, and being able to call my property manager and have them handle things was great. And even on my self-managed properties, if I had a really go-to handyman, that allowed me to just make calls, even though I'm international, long distance, and still have them solve that problem. Team, number one. Systems, number two. So systems, basically, they come down to one word: checklists. So when you first start doing something, you're just going to do it yourself. You're just going to get it done and figure out how to do it. But over time, every single thing you do, I recommend building checklists. So you can actually get a copy of my tenant screening checklist. There'll be a link in the podcast and YouTube description below. And I'll give you a copy of my tenant screening checklist. But I have checklists for everything, including tenant screening, including moving in and moving out, including painting, including cleaning and maintenance, annual maintenance checklists. So over time, every time you have to do something repeatedly, you want to make a checklist. The reason being is if you want to hire out other people like your manager, handyman, painter, you have something, a process that they can go by instead of just doing it randomly. So checklists and systems are really important. And then the third thing is software. So we are living in the golden age of being efficient as self-managers or as kind of small and mighty investors. So you can have software that collects rent, you can screen tenants with it, you can advertise, you can do bookkeeping. There's a lot of good software out there, and it kind of changes from year to year which ones are the best. But you can find a very low cost or even free software to do a lot of the rental work you need. So the point here is, if you want to hold over the long run, if you want to make the big money, number one, mentally, you got to be patient. You got to think about being a buy and hold investor. And then you got to work hard on the little nitty gritty things of building your team, building your systems, and building your software. And then over time, this is where you can actually have a relatively passive rental property business. I typically, as I've had a mature real estate portfolio now, on average worked about 2 hours per week on the management of my properties. So that's with a good number of properties. 2 hours per week, living in other parts of the world is very possible. If you build it that way, you build your systems and have a team, you can definitely do that as well. You've done a great job sticking with me. So I want to review where we've come from. Remember, the whole point of this video is to achieve financial freedom. There is a blueprint. You can follow some steps that others before you have taken. And that involves, number one, building a foundation. Where do you want to go financially? What's your goal? Work it backwards from that. Use the 6% rule to figure out approximately how much wealth do you need to achieve to actually close the gap and achieve financial freedom. So you start there. You think about how many properties you need. You don't need to be a huge 1,000 property big investor. You can be a small and mighty investor and still achieve this one property at a time. Once you do that, you figure out a strategy that makes sense for you. Figure out if you're a starter, are you a wealth builder, are you a harvester? And based on that, you pick a strategy that will work for you at your place of your investing journey. And then you figure out a buy box. Don't just go after any property in the entire market that you're looking at. Pick one type of property, write it down on your buy box letter. That'll help you with everything else. That'll allow you to transition into the mastery part of the blueprint, where you focus on three main skills: buying properties, financing properties, holding on by managing your rental over the long run, because you have to plant that seed and it takes a while for that seed to grow. And it maybe is 5 years, maybe it's 10 years, maybe it's 15 years, but it's a pretty long journey. Eventually you have this fruit tree of portfolio of rental properties that are actually producing cash flow and you have equity and you've arrived at the harvester phase. And that's what I want to talk about now to close, is to give you some tips if you happen to be at the harvester phase, if you're wondering what it's going to be like when you finally get to that point. How do you actually live off your rental properties and actually achieve financial freedom? So in your journey as a real estate investor, you got started with that first property or two, and then you became a builder where you expanded your portfolio, you compounded your knowledge, you learned a lot, you were patient, and you eventually grew that small nest egg into a much bigger amount of wealth, which allows you to transition into the harvester phase, where you're actually finishing the race that you started, finishing this financial freedom journey. Now, I got to say, this is a hard transition for some people, myself included, because you've been in this mindset for a long time of grinding and racing and growing and pushing. And the metrics of success when you are grinding and growing are more properties, more wealth, get the best return on investment you can, have the most leverage. But the goals are actually a little bit different. I love the quote from John Shaw: build wealth, enjoy it, share it. That to me is the epitome of what you're trying to do as a harvester. You're trying to do what matters to you, what you set out to do in the first place. So from your portfolio specifically, there's a few different goals that are different than the builder phase. Number one, you want to maximize cash flow. You might find yourself in this position where you have a lot of equity. Your property has grown in value, but you still haven't shuffled it around where you have enough cash flow from that property. So you might need to do some things that I'm going to talk about in a second to maximize your cash flow. Number two, you want to maximize your time. Why did you do this? You want to have an abundance of time. I want to be a time billionaire. Some people want to have the most money in the room. I want to have enough money to do whatever I want to do, but what I really need to live life is time. So having a portfolio that gives you lots of time is really important. And then number three, you want peace of mind. If you had a lot of money, but you were always stressed and you had a hard time sleeping at night, what's the point? So you've taken all this time to grow your portfolio. You don't want to slide backwards and take big risks that you don't need to take where you can't sleep at night. So it's about all three of those: maximizing cash flow, maximizing your time, and maximizing peace of mind. In my experience, there's a playbook, a harvester playbook that you can follow to actually maximize those three goals. Number one is you can start doing strategic refinances. So this is something my business partner and I have done for many years. You might have properties that have a higher interest rate than the current interest rates. It depends on what the market looks like right now. In 2025, interest rates have actually gone up. So many of you might want to leave some of your old loans alone if they're at 2 or 3 or 4% interest. But over time, you might want to start looking at it and saying, all right, let's refinance this property. Maybe I have a balloon note coming due on 2 properties, or maybe this is a more expensive loan, or maybe I don't like borrowing money from this person. So strategically kind of cleaning up your financing is a big part of a harvester portfolio. You can also do something that's a little bit more of an advanced strategy, but you might look at, you have 2 properties, property 1, property 2 here. And let's say each property is worth $300,000, but you find that you have $100,000 mortgage on each of those properties. So you paid them down a long time. So the payment on each of those mortgages might still be $1,200 per month. So strategic refinancing in that case might mean that instead of having these 2 mortgages on 2 properties, which have $1,200 per month payments, maybe you refinance one of those properties and have a $200,000 mortgage on one property. So you don't have any more debt than you did before. You use the excess refinance to pay off the debt on the other property. And what you might find, and run the numbers for yourself, is that you could have a lower payment because you're starting the amortization over on this new loan. So maybe you have $1,000 or an $800 payment on the new mortgage, and you actually save cash flow, and you do something else that's kind of interesting. You have a higher mortgage on one property, so $200,000, but you have this property free and clear. So from a risk standpoint, I like having one property free and clear and one property with a much higher mortgage instead of having 2 mortgages that are really low like that, because the bank has a little bit more leverage in a really, really bad scenario, which I hope I never run into. But if you're in a great recession or even a depression, having no mortgage on a property is much safer than having 2 properties at 30 or 40% loan to value. So think about that. That's just kind of a very specific strategy that you might want to look at under the strategic refinance category. But you should also be thinking about pruning your portfolio. So you might do this to generate some cash flow to pay off debt, and number 3 that I'm going to talk about. But you might also want to do this just to trade properties. You might have some properties, and I do this by making a list of all my properties, the ones that are not ideal. So the ones that either don't attract the best tenants because of the location they're in, or maybe they just need a lot of maintenance and they never really make money. So you might have a lot of equity in that property, but you could sell that property. And it's kind of like pruning your garden. When you prune off a branch from a tree or a bush, it makes that tree or bush healthier. So you prune off this property from your portfolio, trade it for another one, and you can improve your overall portfolio. That's a very harvester type move to make. But then sometimes instead of doing like just trading properties and doing like a 1031 exchange, you can also just sell the property, pay taxes on it, and pay off the debt. So this is a strategy I've been using for years as well. So instead of being a harvester and into your portfolio and having all your properties at 70 or 80% loan to value, maybe you pay off some of them and maybe you keep some debt on the properties and try to get your overall loan to value down to like 20% or 30%. And I want to tell a quick story to explain this. It's a guy I admire from a distance named Mike Cantu out in California. He was in the stage of flipping. He flips a lot of houses, but he also had rental properties. And he had this strategy of each rental property he had represented the cash flow for a different part of his life. So like this rental property might pay for his insurance. This rental property might pay for his groceries. These two rental properties paid for his travel and so on. And so he had a big windfall where he sold a bunch of land, I think, or some properties. And he had this big chunk of money that he could have traded into something else and been, maximized his return on investment and been efficient from tax standpoint. But instead he paid taxes on that. And he went and paid off those rental properties that were going to pay for his lifestyle. So he had no debt on a group of properties that he was going to keep for the long run. And he had friends and other investor mentors who were like, "You're crazy. Why would you do that? That's not the maximum, return way to do things." But for him, it maximized peace of mind, it maximized cash flow, and it increased his flexibility in his time. So it doesn't mean he can't keep growing. He has still had a real estate business since then where he grows and buys and flips properties. But he has this, I think about like a fortress portfolio, or you can call it an income floor, where you don't go backwards from there. You have this very free and clear or mostly free and clear part of your portfolio. It's kind of like a retirement portfolio that you can depend on, and it takes the pressure off. You can relax a little bit. You finished the race. You've got this cash flow coming in. It's a really smart thing to do. And I admire Mike for that. And we've tried to do that in our own portfolio to some extent to try to get to a similar place. So I know I've covered a lot of ground here, but I would love to hear from you in the comments. If this has been helpful, do you like the blueprint? Is there anything that's missing that you would like to know more about? Let me know. And I'd love to hear from you. If you want to implement this blueprint, I highly recommend you download my free investor toolkit. It includes a PDF of the blueprint so you can review it. It also includes all sorts of freebies like my rental property analysis spreadsheet, like the 12 ways you can find good real estate deals, my tenant screening checklist, lots of goodies that'll help you in implementing this blueprint. I also want to say I made this blueprint video as comprehensive as I could, but there's one big topic that I left out that I just didn't have time to cover, and that's how to run the numbers, like analyze rental properties using spreadsheets, using back of the envelope math. So I want to recommend my next video, one of the most popular videos of my channel, about how to run the numbers using back of the envelope math. This is something that anybody can do, even if you're not good at math, even if you think you can't analyze a deal, if you're confused by it. This video will break it down step by step with me drawing on a whiteboard or on a piece of paper again to help you do that. So if you're watching on YouTube, you can click on the thumbnail above me here, or you can click on the link in the YouTube or the podcast description below. Thank you so much for watching or listening. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.